in any dynamic that like involves emotional intelligence. It doesn't matter what field I've spent time in, it keeps coming back to that over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And it manifests in different ways. I'm sure we'll get into it, but
I think EQ is just it's more necessary than IQ when we're living in a world now that so much of the IQ stuff is being replaced.
mhm.
Um, it used to you used to need your intellect so much more
Mhm.
to keep you out of survival mode.
Yeah.
You needed it so much more to make sure you were gonna make it, and whether that's ancestral or even, during the last, like, 50 to 100 years where, like, there was war and there was industrial revolution, all these things where it took intellect to figure out to problem solve, to figure out safety and all these things, and I think now there's just not that, right? There's not that. I mean, there's memes that's like, "Men used to be in war," and now it's like, some dude, like, doing something weird on a computer, like, that's what he's doing now, he's not in war anymore,
Mhm.
and, I mean, it's funny, but those are the things that are, like, so apparent and obvious now that, hey, the intellect isn't needed as much.
Mhm.
Like, we're no longer searching a library full of books to find that one thing that we needed to know to survive, or like that one ingredient that we didn't know could save us. It's all available.
Mhm.
And so what happens when it's all available and then that IQ is just in override because it thinks it could be smarter than what's available.
Yeah.
And so you're just overthinking everything, right, to a degree. And so if you don't come back to EQ, then you start to trail off from being like very human and very real. And but that's what the Elon robots are for, right? That's what the robots and AI are for, because they'll take that piece hopefully
Mhm.
out of our way in a good way so we can go focus on things that are more human, like connection and like song and dance and art and creating. And that's really what even the brands, like all the brands we talk to, that's what they're doing. They're just creating. Um, but that's what excites me about the EQ piece, and that's why I feel like it is so important for people to relearn if they've kind of drifted away from it, or tap it. I don't think it's relearning. I think it's actually tapping back into it because I think it's inherent. I
Mhm.
think we just don't pay enough attention to it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see because you have this kind of like nature versus nurture conversation and then the integration of tech and how much of like even with robots, you're like, "Oh, we've said for so long, well, it's a robot. It's not going to understand that
Yeah.
level of connection." And like what parts of connecting are things that you can control and things that you can't. Like even the robots, I was watching an interview with a robot
Mm.
and I thought, wow, there are certain cues that they can pick up on slowly that feel
Yeah.
very human. And there
Yeah.
are certain patterns and certain mannerisms and
It's gonna
certain,
get
yeah,
close. It's gonna
it's
get very close because
fascinating.
it's all pattern recognition too. Like if I take a deep breath, it's like, okay, they're contemplating or they're like, like, and then they can tune into like it's pattern recognition. So if if there's like, right now maybe they can recognize 100 patterns,
Mhm.
the simple ones, the smiling, the frowning, silence, talkative. Those are more simple. But then it's like the furthest extent of that, and God knows if they can actually figure this out, and maybe they will, but is like being able to sense and read energy,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
right?
Oh, it's
Because
good.
that's like not
Mhm.
you can't. I don't know how you manufacture that.
Well, when you talk about like bio individuality and people having specific needs, and I think you and I have briefly spoke about like nutrition and having more information that helps you make a more customized
Yeah.
approach. You think about two employees that are getting in an argument about what they're creating, and if a robot has insight and data to the person that they're speaking to, and they're able to speak and communicate in a way that takes into account everything that the person across from them needs, that's gonna
Mm.
be, different.
That's powerful.
You
Yeah.
know, if there's a profile on who's Max and what
Yeah.
are some of her life experiences and what is the lens and what is the language that she needs to hear and what are some of the memories that are prevalent in her life and how does that inform her ego or her ability to be present?
I think
I'm
that's a
cu
really
Yeah,
opportunistic
yeah.
application where what you just said is actually, I think, going to be maybe one of the ways that we can help cross boundaries that most humans get stuck on, which is like when they get into an argument, right? And it's like, fuck, only if you knew how to speak in that person's language without having to learn it, right? Because you didn't know, and that's what the power of AI or
Mhm.
robots could do is like, hey, wait, like this is how this is the translation of what you
What
just
you're
said
yeah,
to
and
make
what they're
sure that it
hearing.
lands and
Yeah,
that is received.
yeah. It's not that you don't wanna comprehend, "Hey, this person is, um, there's something being mirrored back to me, and that's bringing up
Yeah.
the kind of anxious energy within me, and that's bringing up
Hmm.
the avoidant energy in this person." And it's not that you want to negate what the person needs, but it is also that you're having to become aware of what's happening inside of you before
Yeah.
you're able to then connect with what this other person needs too.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that's happening in that stimuli, but I do think that emotional intelligence and how it manifests in group,
Yeah.
collective creativity, bringing things to life is such an important skill that we don't spend that much time discussing, you
Yeah.
know.
I agree. And to bring it back more to, I love this topic of like the humanness, and a lot of what we're doing here
Mhm.
is even in this environment is trying to bring people back to feeling comfort and at home and human. I feel like I've always admired you as someone who can put an environment together that allows for that. Obviously, this is one of them. What are like why do you care so much about details?
Mm,
Because that's something I want to explore,
yeah.
and it's just brushed over sometimes, and I think it is so important. I'd love to understand your
Yeah.
opinion on it, on why details matter.
Yeah. I think that in order to for people to truly create intimacy in anything, you have to think about the experience that allows for intimacy to occur. So even before I start thinking about, the details of a physical space or production or brand identity, I think about a human being. And so to me, the first thing is safety. And you don't realize that design is a part of safety. It's a thoughtfulness that allows people to feel maybe potentially from the lighting, the warmth that they feel, or maybe the textures that they're on. So you're paying attention to elements that contribute to the availability for intimacy even to occur.
Mm,
And I think that in order to be able to truly have spaces where people are able to be creative, you have to create a space of safety because the brain and the body is figuring out how do I allocate energy? And if I create an environment that doesn't allow for safety, it starts to siphon energy that then is not available for creativity. So I
mm.
think
So
that
you're
when,
almost like it's some of the energy is like it's like in a reserve for your
yes,
safety, while you could have been utilizing it
yes.
for something way more important in the present time.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
In order for people to be able to contribute to creativity, to be made available for that, they have to have the physical life force to do that. So you say, okay, what can we do to be considerate in a space that might increase the odds of someone being relaxed? And when they're relaxed, they're maybe more connected to their breath. They're
Hmm.
maybe able to kind of drop in so they're not wanting to be somewhere else. And that allows for a chance for people to have more intimate conversation or the ability to connect to somebody in a more vulnerable way. So I think that design is a tool to do that. I think I'm like obsessed with that idea of, where do we bring the intersection of things like creativity, design, psychology, biology, and say, how can these things work together? And I think that it requires taking a holistic perspective to things versus maybe things being fragmented. If I don't think about when people are going to come sit in this seat and have a conversation with you, or, where were they coming from? Where are they going? What are the things that might affect them on their way to sitting into this chair? It affects the conversation, which affects the audience. So I do think that it's being considerate about the pieces that you can support somebody in order to feel grounded enough to be available to contribute creative energy.
Yeah. And going back to that point of like, how do you say little things often?
Yeah.
Is that's the
Yeah.
little things off, which I think is another kind of similar tune to like the details matter,
Yeah.
right? But
Yes.
dive into that again too, because I think that phrase is also really, really powerful.
Mm.
Um, And it resonates well with everything I'm doing here, and just
Mhm.
even when I've used it on my own narratives
Yeah,
for
I love it.
brands. So where does that come from?
One, I think, like, the overarching theme of that is consistency. And so, like, I used to always say, like, "Oh, it's just the little things, it's the little things," and then eventually it became "It's little things
So
often."
the often piece is
Yes.
consistency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's attached onto it because it's how you can take small incremental adjustments that have, like, a compounding effect that actually yield the outcomes or the opportunity for, success, and I think that it's just a grounding principle that belongs to every single one of us. It's like, "Oh, what can I use as an anchor to think about how frequently I can check in with an employee, the things that I need to take care of my physical well being." So it's this idea that, if we show up for the little things often, we're able to have presence. And I think that presence is like really a beautiful ingredient for you to have potential fulfillment and um, to feel good while you're doing it. I think
Mm.
sometimes we feel overwhelmed. We are hypercritical of ourselves.
Yeah.
There's so much pressure, and some of that is a great privilege. But I think that it allows you to come back to like flirting with the idea of grit and the idea of grace, and just saying like, I don't have to take it all on all at once. We could just do a little bit. And I found that for any type of transformation, that's what it takes. It's not overhauling everything and trying to have intensity. It's actually just making really small choices that contribute to a larger vision and being able to execute against that repeatedly.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I think there's a lot of people that struggle to find the value of doing the little things often, or
Mm.
just don't maybe see it, because it feels so small and it doesn't
Yeah.
feel like they're like moving something.
Yeah.
Um, it's like, why focus on the small things when you can focus on the big things?
Yeah.
Like that's a lot, that's anecdotal, but I think a lot of people believe that.
Absolutely.
How do you help guide someone back to like that's maybe not true, for
Mm.
it's just on
Yeah.
paper, it sounds like, why would I focus on the little things when I can focus on the big things? Like if you have a priority list,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
How do you discern like when to actually use that mantra?
Yeah. I use it all the time, but I do agree that it is very seductive to zoom out.
Yeah.
At the word like, it is enticing. It is, there's a flirtation. There
Yeah.
is it is visceral. It is something that you, uh, wrestle with and dance with every single day. But when you start to, um look at, you know, greatness or excellence or, phenomenal craftsmanship, you do see that it is a granular approach
Mm,
to being in a moment and giving that moment everything that you have in order to be able to uh, be with the material and that it ends up producing typically
mhm.
the best results. And so sometimes it is really bringing people back to process, but understanding that it is innately human not to do that.
Yeah.
And so, like, I also start thinking about, how do you surround yourself with a team and other people that can hold the vision for you so that you can actually start to be in process. And I think when you work with anyone who's highly creative and visionary, that's actually what we need from you. Like you and I were working together, I'm like, what is the big vision? And you need to like put yourself around people that allow you to be expansive. Like I'm like, Sagar, tell me everything you want to build. I wasn't like, let's just go over the next, 6 months. I'm like, tell me everything. So
Mhm.
we could try to consider that for you and hold space for you there. But I know that you as a creative and a visionary that you're going to keep being expansive and then the system around you's job is to say, let's just bring you back to here. We have to film this podcast. We're
Mm,
focused on this one episode right now.
mhm.
And so I don't actually think it's about not letting people be expansive, but like who can you surround yourself with?
Yeah.
How can you put systems and processes in place that allow you to Like, I'm nowhere right now but in this podcast, and even though I might wanna grow the podcast and I might want it to turn into in live, in-person events, and we might wanna, like, expand into product, and I know people that, really want to dream, their fear is if I focus on the present, that in some way, shape yes,
I'll
please.
lose the dream.
I'll lose the
Yeah,
dream.
yeah. I love that, and I that's just such a brilliant way to put it. Is it's not a one man show, one woman show, right? And I think a lot of the times, even when you look at athletes or anything, and I know you have a lot of exposure to that world too. I had the privilege to be with one during a shoot that they were doing, and I was sitting with his team for most of the time, his manager and his trainer. And a lot of our conversation, like, was really around the daily drills,
Mm,
right? The daily
yeah,
workflow, the daily process, the food, the conversations, the team kind of molds the environment
yeah,
correctly so that person can continue to be that person authentically. The athlete can be the athlete, the dreamer can be the dreamer, the founder can be the founder. Um, but you're just illuminating how critical I think it really is to have the complementary people around you. Because if you have like two, three founders in the room,
mm.
you're not getting anywhere, right? You're just
Yeah,
dreaming. You're just like,
yeah, we're your
yeah, you're
operators.
getting high and you're
Yeah.
dreaming about like,
Yeah.
blue sky vision, which is also fun
Yeah,
and super necessary because then you bring that back to your team
yeah,
and the system that you
yeah,
create. And I think it's
yeah,
a beautiful, beautiful way to put it because in real time, I'm thinking about how we've even constructed platform and all the complementary
yes,
personalities, the different sides of the brains that have to come together to be able to really move the ship forward
yeah,
in the direction it needs to go. And
yeah,
so, whether you're talking about a big company or a single athlete, I think what you're saying is like distill that vision down to the little things that they're doing every day
yeah,
to even get there.
yeah,
Because it's easy to have that one big thing be seductive and be like, I just want to be the best basketball player.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and people actually end up increasing their odds of creating the things that they wanted what that they want to build when they are all the way there and they deepen the relationships and they end up going and creating an environment in which people become evangelists for the thing that they want to build. So, an example of that in real time is I was working on set at the time as talent, and Odell Beckham Jr. was there. And this man has every reason to be thinking about a million different things,
Hmm.
and he was so present.
Mm,
He was paying attention to what the director needed and to what the DP needed and to I was talent at the time, so what I needed, and that is his ability to actually flex and practice the muscle of reading the room, of pattern recognition, of leadership, of collaboration, and I know that transfers to what he does on the fields. And so, like, you can use those skills and being in the moment that actually helps you then go create some of the things that you're wanting to, because there's 100 people on set, and when he's all the way there, people end up leaving that set saying, "I really like him. Like,
mm,
I like him. I'm rooting for him." And so they're going out and speaking on his behalf and finding ways to, like, encourage him and root for him and find ways to support him. And so now you have other people that are actually scaling the vision. So it's no longer about just what you need. It's about other people who are willing to say, "He gives me everything he has when he's here. What can I do to help him?"
mm,
And I think that there is a reciprocity in that. I know that the ego will say, "Oh, this isn't that important," or not treating everyone in an environment like they are an asset. I see that often in these environments,
mhm,
but I do think that bringing that mindfulness into the things that you do will ultimately help you build the picture that you're trying to create and the experiences that actually bring like sustainable, like fulfillment and joy and help you expand the vision that you can't even currently comprehend.
mm. Yeah, it's so powerful to be able to have and again, luxury and privilege, but how do you, I guess, how if someone doesn't have that already,
Mhm.
and I think there's a lot of because it's not easy to I mean, it's awesome if you have it. And,
Yeah.
like, listen, I was talking about a professional athlete that makes hundreds of millions of dollars who can afford to put these people around him.
Yeah.
Um, but when he was shooting in the gym or
Yeah.
whatever phrase you want to use, he probably didn't have that.
Mhm.
So in the early stages, before you have the system and you aspire to have the system and you know that you need it, who are you surrounding yourself with when you don't have maybe the financial ability to go and just pull together the best team on the ground?
Yeah.
And is it friends? Is it advisor? Like, how are you even building from that first brick, the second brick, the third brick?
Yeah. It's a great question. I think, you know, it's starting kind of intrinsic, right? If you're like, okay, we are trying to figure out a way to increase awareness, and how do we do that in a way that's accessible to everybody? I like to say like, okay, what are the tools that we could use that have low friction and they're not a big lift. So I think the idea of creating rituals or stillness practices that are introspective is a really great place to start.
Mm,
So what does that look like? I feel like writing is an amazing tool. It's actually something that I really resist. Like I will do all the
mm.
other modalities, but writing consistently is something that I often, resist, and I think for good reason, because it is one of the most vulnerable things.
So
Like
talk about that because I
yeah.
it's only because I resonate too. It is for me weirdly.
Yeah.
I've done all the other modalities and I do them often.
Yep.
The red
The r
light, the meditation,
all
the
yeah.
soundscapes, everything, right? Why is it
Writing.
why is there such resistance there?
I think that when you write, and specifically, like there's different forms of writing, but when you write, you access a lot of the subconscious. And so there are things that your body and your mind have not caught up to. And so writing them, it brings forward some of the things that are so stagnant in our body that we often kind of don't turn towards the modalities that will bring those things forward. So, like, I can go on a walk and that's beautiful, and I love that. It's something, like, I honor every day, but the writing is something that feels really raw, and I do think that we are wired to feel safe and to self-protect, and so, it's making that a practice and starting to bring in repetition with that. If that's not something that you can do, I think the breath is just a really powerful place to start. Like, before you're able to go and be present in like a larger production, being able to just check in the morning for just literally 3 breaths about like, what am I feeling? What am I feeling? And I think that then that allows you to have kind of clarity and to figure out like what is essential. But I think just making it more simple. And so, like, I like the breath because it goes with you everywhere that
Mhm.
you are, and if you can find a pen and paper and you can write. But for you, why would you say that you resist the writing? What do you feel like comes up for
I
you?
usually don't have pens around me. I'll tell you that. I'm like lazy. The resistance,
The
like shit. I
resistance,
gotta find
he's
a pen.
designed it that
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
No, I was funny but true. I think the first hurdle is like shit. I don't have a pen, and then I'm like not doing it.
Mhm.
But I I I think it takes work for me. Maybe I'm not approaching writing in the right way. I feel like the free flow writing is harder for me. Like if I was prompted
Mhm.
things,
Mhm.
it feels easier, then it doesn't feel as hard. But when I open an empty journal, it's almost like daunting in a way because I'm like, I don't know. I wrote this yesterday. Would I write it again? Like,
Mhm.
my feeling like
Yeah.
it's what else do I write about?
Mhm.
It because I think there's two ways. So when people open a blank journal, sometimes the easy thing to do, which I've done many times, is just kind of um, just write down what happened that day.
Yes. Mhm.
And that to me is just like a regurgitation of
Yeah.
like and like
Yes.
I don't even know the point. There was a time when it was probably a long time ago, but again, that was probably when I was in college or school. I wasn't doing it for any reflective reasons. I feel like I was just writing down what that day was about and like
Yeah.
what happened and like, oh, I met so and so and this was a great lunch I had. Almost like a diary to
Yes.
remember
Yep.
things
Yeah.
that one day I can open back up and it's like, wow, look, I went to that store and I met so and so. That to me is easy
Mhm.
because I think you can just do
Yep.
that and it's just like brain dump.
Yep.
How do you approach a blank page where you're not just restating what happened that day?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's my resistance. I just don't know what to do with that blank page.
Yeah.
Like, what am I tapping into? Is it just
Mhm.
a meditation? I don't. It's
Yeah.
hard for me to understand that.
Yeah. Well, one thing, is that, with the writing, like anything, I view it as like it's a relationship. And in that relationship, we realize that we bring expectations to it. So the very fact that we feel like there's a right way to write, like there's the right way or the wrong way, or I want to journal perfectly. I actually
Mm,
want to make sure, so it brings certain things up
yeah.
in that. Of course, it's not to say, I think we mentioned kind of energy allocation. There are beautiful ways to write. I mean, incredible research about just like the power of gratitude. I mean, and people even starting just with the bullets. It's not even that. It's that it actually starts to train your mind to start to look for things. So even having the ritual with a blank piece of paper, knowing that you are committed to coming back and writing tomorrow, it trains you throughout the day to start going and looking for things to be grateful for,
Mm,
opening that up. I mean, you hear people speak often about like wanting to purchase a car, or something gets on their radar and then they start to see it over and over. I think it's like a reticulating activating system, right?
yeah.
Like, so you start seeing these things and now you're looking for it. And so I think if you allow yourself to release and you allow yourself to start to pay attention, like, right, bringing
Hmm.
awareness, paying attention to these things, and you can start with prompts if you need. It helps you start to move throughout your day, and it becomes easier as you go.
Yeah.
And like, whether I know a lot of people right now are writing newsletters or like finding a way to bring like rhetoric and writing to their life, and like it just becomes a natural extension of who they
Yeah.
are and the way that they want to express. And I love Stephen Pressfield's work,
Yeah.
The War of Art, and he
Mm,
talks about resistance, and he's like, there's so many times where you will say I don't have a pen, or it's too warm, or it's too early, and you find
yeah.
all of these ways to resist. And recognizing what that resistance is and showing up for it anyway,
Hmm.
is beautiful.
Yeah. You mentioned the release. I think that was because I think I have this idea that there needs to be a goal associated
Yeah,
to the
that's
writing,
that's a
and
great
that's hardwired, right? I think it's like even with even I'm thinking about a blank sheet of paper and drawing. It's like, oh, let me draw something that looks like it's almost like a goal. It's performative, and it's even blank state. It's I'm like, okay, I have to approach this in a performative way. I think that's just more me personally. I'm sure a
yeah.
lot of people also
Yeah, I
have
think
that
many. Yeah.
pattern, but like, yeah, I think that's the release. Related to that, because I was just recently doing like 2025 goals um, in a writing format. I wanted to jump to the topic of setting goals and being competitive and wanting to win
Mhm.
because I feel like a lot of my conversations recently have been about this groundingness, like let's get connected and all this stuff. And sometimes
It's like
it loses the edge.
yeah.
And I don't want to, that edge is so important to me.
Mhm.
All of this is for that edge in a indirect way, right?
Yeah.
And not that one's more of a priority than the other, but it's a song and a dance. And I think the edge is a very important part of the drive, the momentum, the purpose. And in many conversations that I see online and social media, like as you scroll, there is so much groundedness, and I feel like some people see that and they get scared because it's like, okay, well, that's like soft, right? We've talked
Mhm.
about this before. That's
Mhm.
soft. That's like
Mhm.
that's not going to get me to where I need to be. Like
Yeah.
I need to fucking go.
Yeah.
I need to chase. I need
Yeah.
to do this, and that
Yeah.
is just as important too. For if you're that type of professional, whether
Yeah.
an athlete, like that's a great. Let's use that as an example,
Yeah.
right? You mentioned Odell and all these guys, like they
Yeah.
still have that winning mindset.
Mhm.
How do you incorporate that mindset,
Yeah.
that winning competitiveness mindset, not losing that edge, and still be able to wear that on your chest?
Yeah.
without showing up like an asshole or like someone who's just super aggressive.
Yeah, and it's, like, funny to hear you say it because then I start to realize, like, so many of us have associations with certain things where we identify, like, even potentially winning as something that only an asshole does, and so
Mhm.
I'm like, "Oh, wait, let's break those stories down a little bit." I like to think about things like, vision and execution or vision and integration. So, the first thing is, like, there is a seasonality to everything. And like, I want to hold space for the fact that sometimes it calls for calm, and sometimes it calls for chaos, and sometimes it calls for competitive nature. And so there is room for us to be in the fullness of who we are. And I try not to have judgment about that, not only in myself, but also in seeing clients, right? So it's like removing the judgment of sometimes you need contrast. And it's necessary in anything that we end up loving. If there is not day without night, there is not light without dark, there is not like stillness without flow. So, like, this has been true of nature, it's true of history, it is true of seasons. And so, I think that it allows you to be able to understand when you're brushing up against something. Like, you don't know, like, this floor, this rug is really soft right now under my feet, but this table is really firm. And actually, the feedback that I get from this table contributes to my awareness of being in this room, just like the floor. I don't say, hey, you know what? I have the table. I don't need the fluffy rug underneath
Mhm.
me. And so I think that when we can start to say, how do we think about the vision that we have for our life? How can we think about the energy that we have, and what we need to use that energy in the most thoughtful and creative way. And I think, when you're moving in, you're creating, and it is not linear. There's definitely so many paths that it takes, but without asking yourself, what is the alignment that would actually help me understand the direction I'm moving in? I spend a lot of time working with people that people would describe as high performers.
Yeah.
And so they're like, they've worked in finance, they've worked in tech, they've worked in creative or athletic. And then they say, I have reached pinnacles of excellence, and I'm not sure this is actually what I want.
Mm.
And I'm like, when did we take a moment to actually start to think about the things that we value? And when did we take a moment to think about, which is so beautiful that you have this practice, right? Like, and I think that it takes a lot of courage to and transparency to be able to feel safe enough first to then say, this is something that I desire and something that I trust can happen for me. So let me ask you this. You know, Many people are afraid to write down the things that they want and the things that they hope to create. Like, how did you get to a space where you felt like that's something I want to return to, especially after many, many years maybe of not seeing some of those visions come forward? And
You're talking about writing on the
yeah,
goals
yeah,
in the vision.
yeah.
I've been recently using it as a tool to mitigate overthinking. Um, through the awareness of understanding that I am a high performer in many aspects. Like,
Mhm,
I want to win, I want to achieve. It's in my blood, it's in my DNA. It's a part of the patterns that make me.
mhm,
Some of them no longer serve me as much, just like overthinking, right? And I think that was one of the big ones that I realized. I was like, I get too caught up, and
mhm,
I get in my own way. And through reading and coaching and just being surrounded by great people like
mhm,
Noah, our founder, Todd, who's our CBO, like my core team, Jayla, I think I've finally been able to get back to a place of understanding that it doesn't have to be so complicated. It doesn't have to be so over thought out. And that led me to, hey, can I really distill down to the three or four things I want that if I looked back, if this was what is it, January 2025, if this was January 2026, can I look back and be like giving a speech to a room of kids being like, this is how you crush a year. This is this is how you like I step up on stage at NYU where I went to and like speaking to a bunch of kids who aspire to be like us, high performers, aspirational. Can I really go back and be like, hey, this is how you do a year well? And I
Mm,
feel balanced and I feel like I hit my goals and I feel like I haven't done it at the expense of some of the things I really love.
yeah.
My wife, family, all these beautiful things that I have in my life. The only way I found that that works for me is to be able to distill down to the three, four, five things in each category of my life that I really want that I know is not um hopefully not super superficial or hopefully not like just crazy things like, I'm not putting like, oh, I want 5 houses next year. Like you have to be real with yourself too. And there's a
Yeah,
dance in that as well.
yeah.
And so I think when you finally line those things up on a piece of paper, I actually use it more than anything as a counterbalance in any part of the day. So this is the
Mhm,
interesting part. I think a lot of people put a vision board up or a bunch of goals
mhm,
and maybe they use it as like something to check off when that goal is done, right?
mhm.
And that's its purpose. Or maybe they use it as like, hey, every month let me check in and see if I've done things to get me to that goal. Some people use it really tactically. I actually use it as like a visual counterbalance to my day. So if I feel like I'm getting
Mm,
riled up about something
mhm.
or I'm starting to do things that suddenly feel like I have anxiety or something, I'll go back to this simple like two-sheeter and say, "Hey, the things I'm doing today, like the things that I'm currently feeling right now, are they in alignment or disalignment with any of these things?" And you have to be able to trust that those things are the right things for you.
Yeah,
Otherwise, you're not aligning correctly. But it's been an awesome counterbalance. I'll look at that and immediately be able to like take a sigh of relief, saying, "Wow, I was worked up about something that actually isn't on this thing."
yeah,
So it
yeah,
almost gives me like the freedom to be like, "All right, I don't need this right now."
yeah,
Or I can let that go. Or I don't have to overcompensate or worry about that thing because it's not even driving me towards any of the things that I really want
yeah,
professionally, personally, in any other aspect of my life. So
yeah.
that kind of brought me back to goal setting, to vision
Vision.
boarding,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah, I think it's, like, amazing to be able um to have perspective, and I think, like, taking time I wouldn't say that I think about things as, like, setting specific goals. I like to think of it as that, I design my life. And, like, what does designing your life feel like? What does it look like? That's not just extrinsic things, not just the physical
mm,
things. It's also the intrinsic things, the things that I would like to feel or the places that I wanna access. And I think, like, all humans are wired to want to evolve and want to, learn and want to, create. And I think it really helps build esteem.
mm,
It helps people have like, to be able to say, like, "Here's this loose idea or desire that I have, and the very fact that it's in my body and being means that there's something there for me to learn, um, and that I could work towards that and create and start to, like, have some sort of compass, some sort of direction, while also simultaneously being extremely flexible, is really special,
yeah,
And, there's so many things that I think change, and so, like, you end up like, having these core beliefs that you have that you can maintain and not needing to know what each of the outcomes will be. I do think kinda brings you back to, like, the practice of
hmm
little things
yeah,
often and certain things that sometimes will, completely derail all the plans that you have.
yeah. And I want to also say that a part of it's a good correction actually on my part. The goals that I put down aren't just like hit this
Yeah.
or do this or buy this or have this. It's many of them are I feel like this, right? And so and I
Yeah,
love
I
the way you put
appreciate.
it, like designing how your life feels is really awesome. I mean, how awesome is it to be the architect
Yeah.
of your life and to not let others be the architect of the
Mhm.
life? And so one of my goals like to feel more play with my son, more joy with my son, or like, what does that mean to me is then, hey, can I take the steps more tactically
Yeah.
to get home earlier, to be home more often.
Yeah.
And those turn into tactical
Yeah.
steps, but that's on you to architect on your own time. But the goal is really for that feeling to occur.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably what you're saying too. It's not just about the material tactics or the achievements. It's also about the feeling.
Because when you wanna spend time with your son, what is it that you want to access and feel? Like, when you have the goal of that, what is it
Yeah,
that you're
joy. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. And many times
Yeah.
it's crazy how many dads and dads that I have in my company, in my professional life, my personal life. It is so cool to talk about how we can do that more now because I think there was almost a stat that says that dads are getting more time with their kids now
Mhm.
because of this remote environment and all that. And it's really special.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like people to consider to think of it that way because many times people feel that they want something because of what that thing is going to make them feel and they do not realize that they have access to that feeling right now. So you might say, I want this car or I want this like an usually extrinsic, like I want this car, I want this relationship, I want this a job because in that job I would feel more powerful. And it's
Mm,
like, "Oh, let me think about the things that I think that I want." And then when you write down those things that you think that you want, like I want to spend time with my son. Also think about what does playing with your son make you feel? And so you being aware of the feeling that is created in the opportunity that is playing with your son is that you were trying to access joy. So then you say, "Okay, what ways can I be creative to access joy? Because maybe you're on a trip and you're not able to spend time with your son.
mm,
But what we still want to maintain is the opportunity for you to access joy.
mhm.
So I think that when people think about like evolving, part of the vision needs to be what do you, when you look for these kind of goals or um, these metrics that you're writing down, what is it that you were trying to feel and
Yeah.
how can you create that now, right?
Yeah.
Not
That's a special thing to observe. I think you use one of the examples like, oh, I want this car. And for many people, it's because they want to be seen.
Mhm. Yeah, I wanna be
Right.
seen, okay? And so, like, what are ways that and so when you wanna be seen, what is it that you're really saying? Like, what when someone says even, like, "I wanna be seen," like, this is fun to do in, like, real time. When someone says, like, "I want to be seen," what is it? What is probably beneath, wanting to be seen?
Um, they want to be heard or validated. Um, they want to be able to be
Yeah.
recognized,
Yeah.
right? That they're sitting in front of the person they're talking to, and that person's listening
Yeah.
and understanding and nodding their head, saying yes, and feeling like they've been received,
Yeah, that you
right?
matter and that
Yeah, that you
someone is
matter.
is
Yeah,
paying attention and
yeah.
sometimes you don't get that reinforcement from the external environment. And so being able to like actually start to be a detective about those feelings and those things you're trying to access helps you go, okay, let me journal, let me breathe, let me be in my body and how can I let myself know that I am loved, that I am important, that I am seen, so that I'm not only relying on the external to
Mhm,
give me access to those things.
mhm.
Amazing. If you could be in an environment where people can reassure and communicate and affirm, brilliant. Like
Yeah,
I love that for you, but
yeah.
not we don't always get that actually. And so like actually doing that and doing that inner work and self-soothing and recognizing that
So
it's
important.
oh my gosh, and it
Yeah.
alleviates the expectations and tensions that you put on the external things.
And the external person that you're talking to, because
Yes.
usually that you not getting it from that person then leads you to believe that you're not getting it at all, and then from
Yeah.
yourself. And totally,
Yeah.
I think it's such an important exercise to run. What I love about this conversation is I feel like I have a unique ability to pull this all back into the world of brands because I spend so much time
Mhm.
on brands
Mhm.
and businesses that, again, I have to emphasize this because I believe it's so true. It's just an extension of the person building it, right?
Mhm.
So when you have a supplement brand or a fashion line or whatever it is an extension of what that person believes about themselves and how
Mhm.
they believe that the customer wants to feel. And all these exercises you're saying, you could literally use them on the brand and all that too. It, what brands do you feel like are taking into consideration the little things often
Mhm.
and and even if it's not specific examples of brands, like, how do you see the integration of some of the things we've just talked about that are so fundamentally important to feel good
Mhm.
and to be authentic and to be embodied and all the things we're talking about? How do as someone who loves creative direction,
Mhm.
how are you directing some of these strategies into a brand?
Yeah. When I think about a great brand, I always think about people, right? The people behind those brands first and foremost. But I think that what makes for a great brand is also a great listener. That you listen to the way that people are living, you listen to the way that they're feeling, you listen to the way that they are frustrated, you listen to the way that they maybe reveal things to you that they don't even know that they need. And so, I think of like Melanie Masserin from Gia. She is, and this goes back to the emotional intelligence and the introspective exercise, because I think that the founders that are able to go inside and say, what am I feeling? What am I needing? What would be a beautiful extension of how I want to experience life? And then how can I create something that I could then share that with as many people as possible?
Mm,
And so I think, like, for example, she has a non-alcoholic beverage company, but I think of it as almost like an experience. And so it was her paying attention to wanting to make sure that there was still a moment where people felt considered. They were going to events, people were drinking, and she wanted to be able to make sure that people could sit down and still have something that made them feel a little something, a little special, a little that they were not left out of the equation. And so I think that in order for her to be able to do that as well as she has, she had to say, how can I feel seen? Because I'm not wanting to drink. And so she acknowledged what she needed. And now she's able to create products that I
for
think really,
others.
yeah,
Yeah.
resonate like that. And I kinda like to think in themes. Like, so I'm kind of, when I think about certain industries, like right now, I think about things like sound, and I think about things like, the more education that we get around certain things, it helps us start to realize maybe like products or brands that could become an integral part of the way that
Mm,
we live. For example, we hear so much about the microbiome right now, um, which I think is fantastic, but that also was a result of us having more education around that.
mm.
I think about things like the oral microbiome. Like, I think we'll spend so much more time thinking about that and how that affects our brain and the rest of our body. And
Yeah.
so,
It's crazy.
yeah, just starting to kind
Uh,
of, yeah,
you said
please.
no, you said something, sound.
Hmm.
That's I love that one. Not only because I was a drummer and a
Yeah,
DJ
you're
and
DJ, right?
I just love music, and, it's one of the things I actually don't get to talk about often because most brands don't have sound, you know? It's like most CPG brands don't have sound,
Yeah,
although it's
yeah,
such a powerful tool.
it is.
How do what are you
Yeah.
exploring in that realm?
Yeah, I think that the sound, what's fascinating is, like, it is undeniable that so many of us are greatly, affected by music, and that music is
Yes.
everywhere, and it's one of the things that is very visceral. There's actual vibrations there that help us change our emotional state very quickly. And I think that it's typically for brands, it's an afterthought. Like, we're, someone coming and saying, I want to focus on my visual brand identity. It is more rare that people kind of say, let's talk about sonic branding and let's talk about how people can associate us with the sound and what do we want that to feel like. But I think that there are really incredible people in the spaces, and that really start to say, how can we think about music and sound from its infancy?
Mm,
Right? This is not something that, like, let's create everything and then, oh, what music are we throwing on at the very tail end? And I think it's not about overwhelm, but the more that we can consider the components that contribute to an experience the earlier in the process, the more effective I think that experience can become.
mm,
You know, I think that when you are wanting to be able to access people's hearts and their homes and their daily living, it's thinking about the things that move them. And that could be things like the technology, but it could also be about the composition, and it could be about the artists that you bring in, and the subcultures that that creates. And
Yep.
I just think like a really powerful tool um, that can really kind of stick. I will never forget the first time I went to a live tape recording of a podcast, and the lights went down and the theme song for the podcast went off, and people were hollering. I mean, they were screaming, fanatical.
Mm.
And I realized that sound, what's is a beautiful thread to connect people, but what's really cool is that everybody has a unique experience of where they hear that
Mhm.
sound and what they're doing, and like the
What it
other
means to them.
yeah, and the other memories that they're bringing to it. Like, someone might be listening to that podcast on their commute to work. Some people might do that while they're at home cleaning up. Some people might be listening to that podcast on a walk. And so with music, it's like there's so many other memories that are actually getting created when we're listening to sound, that I feel like there
Yeah.
is a stack of
And I think your brain stores it in a
yeah,
different way. Your body
abs
stores it, right?
yeah,
That's the cool part. Like
yes.
that's why I loved DJing. And hopefully I get a chance to pick it back up someday and show my son what it was like. But it it's such a special way to evoke emotion from someone.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm,
and it's so crazy that like, sometimes I hear this is no judgment, right, at all in this statement, but like I can see when people I can almost tell by a person's attitude or a personality, like the type of music they may be listening to,
mm.
and what that can actually be doing for like it almost is like it can further them in a direction
Yeah,
that and I think like that's like some like super hardcore rap that like
yeah.
energy is low,
Mhm,
right? The
mhm,
energy is low. The words plus the sound equals low energy
mhm.
for this specific song. And I think that can actually drive you to think that way.
Totally.
And then when there's uplifting
Yeah,
and then the vibration is correct to some degree that like, can certainly be in tune to make you feel like dancing
yeah,
or to be lifted,
yeah,
it's a whole nother feeling. And then you have that also when you're studying or just trying to chill out, like meditation music.
yeah.
It's so powerful.
Yeah. And it's like, and there's so many variables that I think affect that resonance for people, because you think about things like culture. You think about things like when someone is listening, let's say let's use like rap for an example, right? Or hardcore, like hip hop music. To some people, they might view that as very aggressive and violent, but there is a culture of people that say that feels very familiar to my upbringing, and that actually feels like something that I recognize, and
Yeah.
something that was a form of taking some of our pain, taking some of our trauma, and then creating something with it. And
Mm,
so, like, it was actually transmuting energy, and I think that that's a part of like a spiritual process. Like, art can be a spiritual process. And so I think that people can be in alchemy from taking a feeling and then materializing that and creating art with that.
mm,
And I also think about it like I have an incredible business partner, Jordan Vanderwyden, and his background was in music. Like, he was an artist and he's an incredible DP. We own a creative agency together, but I think about his knowledge in cadence and tempo and how that affects the way that he films somebody. And so that there are elements and principles, I think, in music that can really shape so many things. When you're in a space, what does it mean when you're consuming content that feels very fast or glitchy compared to content that might feel slower
so
or
the elements even furthering from music, more
yeah,
like rhythm, right? The
rhythm,
rhythm of things.
cadence, tempo,
Yeah.
bass, vibration, the frame. You think about the frame, right? So the sound feels different based in a different environment. Like, and that sound in a room that is built for acoustics is really different. And so
Yeah.
when you talk about something like brand building, it is also about how do we find and acknowledge, brands that are being intentional, that are being extremely heart led, that are curious about the way in which we experience things in life, and the choices that they can make in that.
Mm, yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about all the different
Yeah.
ways that sound and music have been so, so powerful in the work we've done, my background, all of that. It's just been such a big piece of it.
Mhm.
Even simple things like mnemonics, right? That like, and for those
Go
you
ahead.
who
Yeah,
don't know, the
please.
mnemonics are just like the when Netflix comes onto your screen, it's the sound, the or whatever it
Yeah.
is. And then the HBO and all of those
Yeah.
things you can hear from another room and
Yeah.
like run back in because you're like, I want to be there.
Yeah.
It's so special.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
even think about just like from a very primal standpoint, these beautiful heritage and culture that really utilize sound so beautifully, like
Mhm.
Native American culture and Hawaiian culture, and so many kind of beautiful chants and the ability to be able to use tone
Mm.
and to heal and
Mhm.
to unite and to collaborate and to call people in. And I think that, content is a version of that, right? We see like content now starting to kind of expand and ripple out to like draw more people in. But sound was a tool from very early stages to start to say, how do we amplify who we are and where we come from and the
Yeah.
things that are important to us?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it'll be fun to see.
I have another good question for you that I think you specifically would be able to answer well.
I'll
How do
try.
you source inspiration and curate your feeds
Mm,
and your potentially environments to just fulfill that piece of you that needs that inspiration? Because from following you and your
mhm,
work and obviously the stuff we've done together, you've been able to pull really well from your periphery, but I feel like you've
mm.
you've curated your periphery. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Like you've kind of curated the things around you to give you and feed you the inspiration that you feel like you need.
yeah.
I
I'm
don't know if
like,
that's
it's so fun.
I don't know if
I'm
that's
like, it's so
algorithmic
fun. Yeah.
or like how do you
I'm all
build that though so that at a certain point you're really being fed the energy you need every day? Because I still even maybe a shitty example, but
but
like
yeah,
I'll
please.
open up my Instagram whatever and it's like I want to see more people like, you and Jordan who are posting cool things and like
Mm,
inspiring things. So how obviously there's the simple thing of like
yeah,
continue to like those things and your algorithm will show you more, but are there other tactical ways to architect and to design
yeah,
your periphery
yeah.
to feed you that inspiration more often?
Yeah, I think about allowing yourself to pay attention to the things that you are drawn to, the things that you like, and you don't even need to know why you like them, Like a lot of things that I realize now that I like, some of them were influenced at a subconscious level, like even as early in childhood. Like my mother is British, and so there were things that were done in our home that I didn't realize was maybe a part of what people would describe as like a European aesthetic or sensibility or value, but that it makes sense to me now. And I think like, going back to that vision and alignment, it's like I start to think about, okay, what are the things that I value? And then how can I start to go into different spaces and pay attention to the things just that I'm drawn to? And
Mhm,
you peel those layers back, like, why do I like this artist, or why do I like this painting, or why do I like these books, or why do I like this environment? And I have found that when you start to bring those things together, it just starts to reflect back to you who you are and the things that you deeply value. And in those spaces, I have found them to be a beautiful way for them to start to signal to other people some of the things that we share and the things that we value. And I'm like, that's so special. Like, if I'm in this environment, that might be something that Daniela appreciates, and there's other things that Daniela might love that now I can learn from her. And I think that at the end of the day, how I don't know if it was a conscious decision at the time, but I started to just think about like the fragility of life and how I did not want to wait to experience the things that I love. And so, if I could surround myself with small appreciations, small bits of things that I have just extreme sincere gratitude for, the way that someone made that ceramic, or the way that someone designed a speaker system, that it would allow me an opportunity to be surrounded in beauty and in um, um, joy, and that it would also help me connect with people that might appreciate some of the similar
Mhm.
things and that I would learn things from them,
Yeah.
you know? And so sometimes people will write me because I'll, whether I'm like playing with art direction or creative direction, and they're like, I love that like so much. And I'm like, what do you love about it? And then their answer might be actually really different than some of the things
I
that
love that.
you and
Yeah.
I, we sometimes send each other cars back and forth.
Yeah.
And, I know you have a deep appreciation for cars. I don't have the same appreciation for
Yeah,
those
yeah.
cars, and maybe in different ways, but like it also allows me to have an intimacy with you that I might not ordinarily have, because there's this other thing that I've signaled is something that I appreciate, and now you signal that as
Mhm.
well, and we say, "Hey, we can think of each other," you know?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and I,
it's
I'm
so
like I'm like I
special.
love that.
That's literally a prime example of how you curate that stuff around you, and it's like then you become that reflection for everyone,
Yeah.
and it gives us a channel then to connect on.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to
Yeah.
be the same reason why you like it, like, why do you like cars? And then I could kind of explain some of my.
For me,
Yeah.
it was just it's really simple actually, and I've asked myself that question before because it was weird that I the other day I was thinking I was like, why do I like cars? It's not like I don't know shit about engines or anything. It was two things. It was fundamentally design.
Mhm.
I love design. Like, more
Yeah.
than the mechanics, I love the design. I actually wanted to be a car designer when I was really
Okay.
young. And so I would mold clay models
Oh.
and things like that. Yeah, it was really cool. I'd spin around. I would literally go from my middle school to like get bused to an art school for like 2 hours a day to be able to do this. It was a really cool program, and um, design was something that always it was just so unique for cars and the different ways that they were doing it. So I fell in love with that, and then it was a way to connect with my dad.
Mm.
We went to car shows every single year. That was like our thing we did. And as an immigrant father who was working extremely hard, most of his life, there wasn't many things we could like go out and do together
Yeah.
and enjoy together. Also, the cultures were so different. I was learning things that he had no idea how to even talk to me about. And so that was one thing we
Mm.
were able to really connect on year after year, and it was special. So my love has heritage to it for
Yeah.
cars, and it's not just about cool, expensive things.
Yeah.
But the irony is that high design costs a lot of money because you're hiring people to spend all of their time
Yeah.
handcrafting design, and that's why it doesn't cost as much to buy a Tesla off a huge factory line
Mhm.
than it does a handcrafted Bentley or whatever. So
Mhm. Mhm.
that's
Yeah, and the
that
power of
yeah.
you, in the power of creating, an opportunity to make some of the things that, we value visual, is that I now learned that about you, and had I not also maybe shared my interest in cars, I would never know, you know what, every time I see Sagar have interest in that car, that was actually really about his connection with his father.
Mm,
And that's actually, I didn't know that, and I can
yeah.
imagine that as having a parent that's an immigrant, it's, a unique experience being in the States, and so getting a chance to connect with their family, your father and your son in that way is unique and special.
Yeah.
And so, like, I love that because now I feel like I know a little bit more about you, and at the end of the day, it's like, what's the point of, like, curating, aesthetic visuals if you don't end up having the depth and intimacy that allow life experiences to come forward that actually help you create meaning in life.
Mhm.
It's like,
It's
it's
so
not about the mood
special.
board. It's
Yeah.
not about the aesthetic. It's that it is a way
It
to.
meant something,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah, and
important.
to
Yeah.
help, like, understand more about the things that other people are drawn to,
Mhm.
like the things that come up for them, and what something might mean to somebody. But also I feel like, um, it's important to have people who give themselves permission to access their imagination.
Mhm.
And when I think about the people that I kind of have been inspired by, I think about people like, or companies, even like at the time growing up, like Walt Disney. And I thought about, good, imagine that man did not have the ability to like use his imagination and create some of the things that he created. And I think it's a really generous gift if you can access your imagination, and then you can find a way to m- share that,
Mm.
you know. And
Yeah,
it
and I
doesn't
think
take.
you're reminding me to just ask why more, and like to that little special thing that you did is which is when someone says, "Oh, that's so cool," like, that the way you shot that or whatever,
Mhm.
you're saying, "Why did you
Why?
think
What is it?
why did that seem cool to you?"
Yeah.
And I think that opens up a huge new opportunity to connect, and we've had so many conversations about connection. I think that one tool hasn't been uncovered yet,
Yeah.
which is like that reflection back to the person to say, "What is it in this that provokes you?"
Yes. And
And
that discovery. And I think so many people identify as socially anxious. And I'm like, the more that you can get out of what you're needing and access what the other person has to share with you,
Mhm.
the you increase the ability to have like really meaningful relationships
Yeah.
in your life. And so like being able to say to someone, what came up for you, and like that for me, I mean, selfishly for me, it was just something that helped me get out of myself. Like I needed that question. It wasn't like me taking some like noble high route of like, oh, it was like I needed that question because I needed to be able to have something that helped me remove myself from being in my ego. So what helped me do that is stop thinking about self and start getting into what they have going on and it that calmed me,
Yeah.
that calmed me. And I, as an adult, realized, some of that becomes like survival mechanism and your need to have done that and kind of be in a room and now being able to kind of draw my energy back to myself and make sure that I have the capacity to have that conversation
Yeah,
that I
because that
just
that is not just automatic,
oh yeah.
and then you're just
Cuz
opening a sandbox you don't wanna play in,
yes,
right?
you
Yeah.
have to be able to like audit when it's appropriate to have that conversation and yeah, and what boundaries or containers you need for that
Mm.
conversation to exist. But I do think that I really cherish that intimacy with people in depth, and I have found like the aesthetic and visual and bringing things together and saying um, I I I hear people say like kind of world building. Like I really love that idea
Mhm.
of what are some of the other things, and specifically in brand. I think some of the best brands in the world, they are able to create something that has a unique point of view, to really be diligent about upholding that, and because they are so clear in who they are and why they exist, they're able to then collaborate with other people,
Mm.
and it it broadens the scope of the things that
Yeah.
people are drawn to,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I love that point on collaborations. You really need to know who you are to be able to fully be there to collaborate with someone else.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it won't show up as great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you see this in terms of, like, real estate or, partnership. I think about, I mean, this is gonna be dated for some people, but I think about, I lived in Los Angeles for, like, 13 years, and you think about some of, the brands like at the time Soul Cycle was a huge brand in the health and fitness and wellness space, and wherever there was a Soul Cycle there was quickly a Sugarfish. And so like you started to see, oh wow, when we can start to think about like urban development and how we design spaces and some of the appreciations that people have, it helps us start to be able to look at data and experience and products. And we see this now digitally with an algorithm. Like an algorithm is essentially that. It's trying to say, here's the things that I see you paying attention to. Here's these other things. And yes, there is
Mm.
inherent danger in that because it starts to limit some of the things that we're exposed to. And I think that human beings are wired for unpredictability. We don't
Mhm.
need to just see the things that we
You wanna be in discovery.
yeah, like we need that.
Yeah.
That is something that we will always
Yeah.
crave. Yeah. So it's important to kind of venture out of your field or out of the scope, and I know other people, Mara Brockakeel, amazing showrunner, Trisha Benitez Venum of Pop Up Home. These are artists and entrepreneurs that like go and find other things that move them and then bring those into their
Spaces.
spaces, and you can tell like that they have incorporated many interests but
Mm.
with kind of themes and
Yeah.
thoughtfulness.
That's so beautiful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You have a unique background in having worked in finance,
Mhm.
so very entrepreneurial, at one of, like, the best financial firms in the entire world, but you also have this other side that's, like, very design-centric and art appreciation. I would love to hear a little bit more about your relationship to, um, artists and entrepreneurship and art. And, like, that relationship about how they either work together and in conjunction and or not.
That is a really good question because what you're really asking me is like how I blend the two sides of myself as well in a way because I
Mhm.
have those are both prominent pulls for me of like the artistic side and the more entrepreneurial business side. I always thought that they I think couldn't exist together um or coexist
Mhm.
well just because I came from two environments where like I mean, I hate to say it, but it was like 2 lives of like going to work at BlackRock and, being super buttoned up and super corporate
Yeah.
kinda sucks the art out of it, right? There's no art in that, and then, going full on to the other side of the spectrum at night, the same night, typically.
Oh, wow.
Like, on a just
Mhm.
call it a Friday, I'm literally waking up 6 AM, putting on my corporate hat, my business hat, and thinking, "This is life. This is the way, one track mindset for the next 10 hours of that day." And then getting out, taking it's almost like that Superman, you take it off and you take off the
Wow.
suit, and then I had my, like, streetwear on, and you hit the
That is
town,
deep.
hit the streets of New York, completely different mindset. Talk about how music helped.
Mm.
That was a key too. That was like a bridge from the day because, like, during the work, I would listen to, like, very, like, you know, I don't know if it was, like, classical
Oh,
music,
like
whatever
classic?
would get me into the zone music, and then I would play like that, like on my way home, I'd have to get into another mindset of like artistic, creative, like let's go play some music and get people dancing. And it was two worlds that I didn't think could come together. In a way, I've had to keep them separate for so long. And now I think I've finally found ways, and I think social media has helped. I think just experience and age has helped. I think having a family and my wife and my son has helped. I think all of these things have come together to show me that there is a relationship between the two that can exist together. Um, and the best, I think, anecdote to kind of showcase that is really our work at Platform. I was trying to think of a better, like that is the example. Like it's finally come together where we are able to be creative in our effort, be creative in our ability to show up in the way we show up, be creative in the sense that we are authentic to what we believe. We're not trying to conform our mindset to fit a certain box. We're actually paid to think differently,
Mm.
which is really special. Like that is the easiest way to combine the two, right? Entrepreneurship, okay, but we're going to pay you to be creative,
Mhm.
right? To think different. So because I went from those two very stark ends of the spectrum, I think I have so much appreciation now for the convergence of the two because I get to wake up most days where we can enter the day knowing that we're building entrepreneurially and that we're putting bricks on bricks and numbers are important and client relations are important and servicing the clients are important. That's all like business entrepreneurism. And then you have this unique flexibility to bring in architecture and design into the way you do the things that are, needed to be done. So a good example is approaching a client for the first time and they have aspirations to be in all retailers around the world. They want a world build, right? And they want to be everywhere. They want to be wherever the consumer is. Well, that immediately gives you a blank canvas and you can treat it like art. I think that's the distinction here. You can empower yourself to treat it like art
Yes.
because I think some people might take that as like, yes, let's follow this template. They want this,
Yeah.
the input, they want this output. I got to go find
Yeah.
that for my like last pitch deck or a bunch of saved documents and let me reconfigure it to match that person's input. That's like more of the, that's just more of the desk job way to think about things. And fortunate, but we are privately owned. We have the flexibility to think different because no one's telling us. There's no big brother telling us like think this way. You have to produce this way. Our DNA, to a lot of people in our firm's credit, and especially Noah, our DNA is like think different,
Mhm.
be disruptive, break down the walls that were put up by retailers,
Mhm.
break down the shelves. And the analog would be break down the shelves that were put up and show them what can be, right? And don't be afraid to dream because that's the service we're providing, is the art of thinking differently, and to be able to say, hey, when the client comes to us and says we want this, wow, this is now a net new blank canvas. I think you mentioned it earlier, like some of the most key fundamentals there is like listening, right? What does that customer want? And then not putting that into a box of like, does it fit what is already possible?
Yeah.
Right. And then like taking that and just splatter paint, right? Like let's just put out all the ideas and then we'll kind of shave it down to for it to make sense. But
Mhm.
let's start with the blank canvas. Let's put all our ideas out there. Let's say some crazy shit like, hey, we can, have your product on every single like billboard around the world, right? That's like crazy shit that was going to cost too much money that won't be feasible. But let's start there. Let's start at the edges of the realm of possibility and then shave it down based on the actual ability to execute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I feel like there's this invitation where we used to say like, this person is creative, or they'd say, or this person is entrepreneurial. And it's like creative, like I want creatives to know that they can and should care about making money. And I want entrepreneurs to know that they can and should care about being creative. And like you having a new way of seeing the world
Mm.
and deciding that these complementary things can exist together and should actually be something that should be thought of and considered. I think is still something that I feel like there are other brands that are kind of trying to merge different
Yeah.
industry, different conversation, different material, for people to have more unique experiences.
Yeah. And I think because we're in a service business, I'd say my biggest sort of advice or way to think about converging the two for people who don't
Yeah.
already do it is even if you were to split it right down the middle, like if you had a deck explaining what you did,
Hmm.
right, and you split it right down the middle, the first half could be about the business, the why, the problem, the solution,
Okay.
right, and then the second half, in specifically the service industry, because that's different. I'm not giving someone a product and saying like, I hope you like this, and I
Yep.
hope it tastes good, and I hope it makes you feel better. The second half can really be the art of the experience and the partnership, right? And to
Mhm.
help people understand what it feels like to work with you. That's the piece that I think you can bring the creative side out of, because the problem solution side will always be transactional to a degree. There's a
Mhm.
problem, there's a solution, and that's the value you're providing. Where do you fit art into that? I think you fit art into the experience and the partnership and the feeling of what is that what is that person or that brand really going to feel like when they're working with you? Are they going to feel inspired, and are they going to feel limitless? Are they going to feel like you have their best interest in mind? Are they going to feel like they can
Mhm.
trust you?
Mhm.
Right? That's all a part of the service experience.
Yeah.
Do they feel like you got their back when shit is gonna get hard,
Yeah.
which it will for most brands, right? Like
Yeah.
you're fighting the big boys, you're fighting, behemoth retailers, especially in our industry. So having those fundamental things up front to showcase a potential partner, like, hey, this is what it feels like working with us. That's where the creativity lies.
Mm.
And that's where I think you have the flexibility to come outside of the template and say, this is how we're gonna work with you.
Mhm. Mhm.
No, this was great, Max. You're such you and your partner Jordan are such powerhouses in being able to bring and transfer energy from verbal conversations, from environmental, aesthetics, and bringing that all into a single consistent feeling. Um, and it's a really empowering conversation. I hope that some of these tactics can be pulled into the businesses that need them the most,
Mm.
or the people that feel like they couldn't converge those two worlds. And I feel like that's where the power is and the authenticity is. So I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your
Yeah.
partnership, and
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Yeah, you can
Yeah.
design your life. Do
You can design your life.
it.
Amazing.